Okay, good morning. Again, Doug Kessler from ComTech. Going to talk lessons learned in next generation 911. This is going to be based upon essentially, is it going to, next slide. Oh, there we go. So we're going to talk about next generation 911, but before we do that, I wanted to just level set with everyone, make sure we're all on the same page. Next generation 911, the various network elements. I'm going to go through this quickly, not going to read everything, explain everything. For this particular presentation, I want to talk about a little bit of governance, a little bit of NG core services, a little bit of EZNet, and some of the operational challenges we've seen. So I thought we were in DC, so I thought it'd be great to have a quote from a great general and maybe modify that quote a little bit. So in preparing for next generation 911, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So that's very important. Next generation 911, there's a large component of this that is about planning. And planning for a migration from a legacy system to an IP system is a big change. This is important because planning is an activity. That's a verb, right? You need to continue to modify your plans. It's not a document. You look at it and it's static. That's a key component of this presentation. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Every deployment's going to be different. Organizational authority, chain of command is very important. Making sure you have regulatory authority at your jurisdiction when it comes to next generation 911 is critical. And then the last thing is the gathering of information prior to an RFP, prior to an actual deployment of next generation 911 is very critical. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. I couldn't have a presentation without a network diagram. That's just who I am. So next generation 911 for this particular presentation is made up of 4 components. I grouped them into 3. The first is the communication service providers, the carriers that ingress to the next generation 911 network. In the middle is your next generation core services and ESINet. I've grouped that into 1. And the last thing are the PSAP connections from the next gen core services, ESINet into the PSAP. Emergency Services IP Network. Thank you. I assume everyone knows that, but that's a bad assumption. Carrier ingress. This is probably one of the biggest challenges with next generation 911. You have to ingress all the carriers within your particular region into the next gen 911 network. That's all. So I say this could be anywhere from tens to upwards of 100 carriers. So in the state of Iowa, NextGen 911 is provided by ComTech. There are more than 100 carriers in the state of Iowa. They all need to ingress into that next generation 911 network. It's a lot of work. Yet, so as part of that, you need to get their authorization to do that, essentially force them to interconnect to these points of ingress. You have to come to a design agreement. You have to make sure that everyone's on the same page with where they're going to interconnect and how they're going to interconnect. And many times you run into these carriers and you ask them about 911, and the guy who connected 911 back in 1982 retired. So they don't even know who the person is. They don't have service order codes in their systems for 911. It can be a real challenge. Let's talk about the next gen core services and ESINet. Oop. So during this migration of next gen 911, you need to essentially support 2 networks. You need to support 2 networks from the carrier into the next gen core services environment. So a legacy network to the selective router and an IP network into next gen core services environment. Same thing holds true for PSAPs. You need to essentially have PSAPs interconnected to the next gen 911 network. You have to have PSAPs that are interconnected to the legacy selective router. There are 2 networks in parallel that need to be supported during the migration. So a couple of things to point out here. The red line that goes up there, those are inter-tandem trunks. Those inter-tandem trunks are something that is not supported today typically. You need to turn those up in order to support next gen 911 migration, and then you need to support that for transferring out of your next gen 911 network to a legacy network. That's increased cost, increased time, and these are things that jurisdictions really need to be aware of when they sign up for next gen 911. The migration of carriers in particular can take upwards 6 months to 18 months, depending on how many there are, the complexity. It's a long process. PSAP side of the house here. When we look at RFPs, many times we'll see where a jurisdiction will say, we want 10 megabits carrier diverse connections into each and every one of our PSAPs. It sounds great, but it's costly to do that, especially if it's a 2-seat PSAP. 20 megabits of bandwidth into a 2-seat PSAP or a 3-seat PSAP is what we call overkill, right? So there are things that jurisdictions need to really understand when they design and they put requirements into an RFP when it comes to those kinds of things. The other thing is diversity. Just because you ask for carrier diversity doesn't mean you have access network diversity, meaning the copper that runs down the street, even though you have carrier diversity, they could be running across the same sheath of copper down a street. So a backhoe that cuts into that piece of copper can take down both AT&T, CenturyLink, Verizon, whoever it might be, because they're running across that same piece of copper. Last thing I'm going to say is text to 911. So with text to 911, just because you have next generation 911 and you have an ESI net, not all those PSAPs are going to be I3 capable at that particular time. They may not have I3 capable CPE. Therefore, you might have to support a web-based system until you get your I3 call handling system upgraded. And I'm going to run through these observations real quick. This is kind of a miscellaneous catch-all for some other observations. We're seeing tariffs being used in place of RFPs, just another method of actually procuring NextGen 911. We're starting to see, thankfully, carriers ingress SIP, Session Initiation Protocol, into the NextGen 911 environment. Up until recently, it was always a TDM-based ingress into the network. Location. I see these articles all the time. I want to see, how many people see the articles where it's like, oh, we have NextGen 911, our location's going to be better. It's really a misnomer. And we need to make sure people are aware that just because you have an NextGen doesn't mean that you're going to have better location. And last thing, not necessarily tied to NextGen, but wanted to make a point here is that we're still working to get text to 911 transfers through the text control center standardized. It's not there, so West and ComTech need to put together proprietary methods of doing that. And the one last thing I want to say is on the carrier ingress side, it would be very nice to see some structure, some methods of how carriers are required to provide ingress into a next generation 911 network. So with text to 911, a jurisdiction can go and say to the FCC as an example and say, I want text to 911 service. That filters down to all the carriers. People like ComTech and West will then turn up that particular jurisdiction with text to 911. Nothing like that exists for NextGen 911 right now, and it'd be nice to see something for that capability. That's all I have. I think I'm right in about 9 minutes. So I have about a minute for a question or two, if there are any questions. Okay, well, oh, sure, yes.
Talk just a little more about tariff versus RFP. Why tariff?
Well, tariff, if jurisdictions do decide to go down a path of tariff, it allows for an easier method of getting next generation 911 up and running, meaning you don't have to go through the RFP process. You don't have to build an RFP, you don't have to go through, have a consultant get a bunch of information or data or whatever it might be to build the RFP. A tariff, you can just essentially go to people like ComTech or whomever and say, we want a tariff for NextGen 911. We can establish a tariff within that jurisdiction or state, and the jurisdiction can then buy off that particular tariff. This is my personal opinion. The one challenge with a tariff is it could create fragmentation within a particular market, right? So if a state says we want to do tariffs, and you have 5 tariffs, in theory, you could end up having 5 NextGen 911 systems all within that jurisdictional area. So that can lead to interoperability challenges. We all know that it's a network of networks, but still interoperability is a big issue, a big challenge. Yes, sir.
I know Colorado and California, what other jurisdictions are there?
Those are the two that come to mind, actually. In Pennsylvania, I know they've built tariffs for IP selective router services. And Western PA, called Region 13, on the west side of Pennsylvania, they went through a tariff to get some NextGen services there. But California, Colorado, Pennsylvania, I know for sure have done that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.